June 1944. Dawn breaks over southern England, but the sky offers no comfort. The sound comes first, an uneven mechanical buzzing, low and relentless, cutting through the morning air. Civilians freeze where they stand. Soldiers look up instinctively. Everyone knows what it means. A V-1 flying bomb is inbound. Moments later, the sound stops. Silence follows. Then the explosion tears into the ground below, shattering buildings, streets, and lives without warning. There is no dogfight, no siren loud enough to outrun it, only seconds between recognition and impact. This is Germany's new weapon, and it is only the beginning. Across the Channel, even as the smoke rises over England, American bombers are already airborne. Long formations of B-17s and B-24s push eastward toward occupied Europe, not toward cities, but toward forests, rail lines, concrete pads, and structures that do not look like weapons at all. From the air, the targets appear ordinary. From intelligence reports, they are anything but. This is Operation Crossbow. It is not a single raid or a single battle. It is a hunt. A systematic effort to find, disrupt, and destroy weapons designed to terrorize civilians far from any front line. Weapons that cannot be intercepted easily. Weapons launched from hidden sites, moved at night, rebuilt faster than they can be counted. The bombers fly knowing one truth. If they fail, the buzzing over England will not stop. It will multiply, and the race against time has already begun. By 1943, the air war over Europe had entered a brutal phase. Allied bombers were striking deep into the heart of Nazi Germany with increasing frequency, targeting factories, rail yards, oil facilities, and cities. The goal was clear: break Germany's capacity to wage war by destroying its industrial base and exhausting its defenses. For Germany, the pressure was existential. Night after night, British bombers crossed the Channel. By day, American formations followed, filling the sky with contrails and defensive gunfire. Civilian casualties mounted, production faltered, morale frayed. Adolf Hitler demanded a response that would restore the balance and strike directly at the enemy's population. The answer, he believed, lay not in matching bombers with bombers, but in technology. German engineers had been working on revolutionary weapons long before the bombing reached its peak. At secret facilities, they tested pilotless aircraft powered by pulse jets and rockets capable of reaching the edge of space. These were not conventional weapons. They were designed to bypass air defenses entirely and deliver destruction without warning. The V-1 flying bomb was the first to mature. Cheap, simple, and terrifyingly effective, it could be launched from occupied Europe and sent toward British cities without risking a pilot. The V-2 rocket followed, far more advanced and far more dangerous. It traveled faster than sound. There was no warning, no interception. Impact came before sound. For Allied planners, these developments represented a new kind of threat. Bombing campaigns had always involved risk, but they also involved predictability. Aircraft could be detected, tracked, and fought. The V-weapons changed that equation. They turned the act of attack into an automated process, one that could continue regardless of losses or weather, aimed directly at civilian populations. Intelligence reports filtering in from occupied Europe raised alarms. Unusual construction sites, long concrete ramps hidden in forests, massive underground facilities carved into hillsides, rail shipments guarded with unusual secrecy. Individually, the pieces meant little. Together, they suggested something unprecedented was taking shape. Britain had survived the Blitz, but these weapons promised something different. They were not raids to be endured. They were systems designed to wear down a population day after day without pause. As the first V-1 launches approached, Allied leaders faced a grim calculation. If these weapons became fully operational, no city in range would be safe. Air superiority alone would not stop them. The threat had to be confronted at its source. What emerged from this realization was not a single plan, but a sustained campaign, one that would rely on intelligence, air power, and relentless pressure to hunt weapons that were designed to remain unseen. That campaign would soon be formalized, and its success would depend on whether the Allies could learn to recognize danger hidden in plain sight. The first decisive clues emerged from the air. High-altitude reconnaissance photographs taken over northern France revealed structures that defied easy explanation. Long, narrow concrete ramps pointed toward the English Channel. Support buildings were arranged with unusual precision. Rail spurs led directly into forested areas that showed no signs of conventional industry. British photo interpreters studied the images frame by frame. Shadows were measured. Dimensions were calculated. What initially appeared to be storage sheds or agricultural facilities began to form a pattern. These were launch sites. At the same time, human intelligence confirmed the danger. Reports from the French resistance described restricted zones, sudden evacuations, and construction guarded with unusual secrecy. Workers spoke of mysterious weapons tested at night. Trains arrived under heavy security and left empty. No one was told what was being built, only that it was vital to the war effort. One name surfaced repeatedly in intelligence assessments: Peenemünde. Located on the Baltic coast, the research facility was the center of Germany's advanced weapons development. It was here that the V-1 and V-2 programs were tested and refined. For months, Allied analysts debated its purpose. Some believed it was an experimental aircraft base. Others suspected rockets, but proof was limited. The breakthrough came in 1943. Accumulated evidence forced a conclusion that could no longer be ignored. Germany was preparing a new class of weapons aimed directly at civilian populations. These were not theoretical projects. They were nearing operational readiness. And once deployed, they could not be countered by traditional air defense. The response was swift, but imperfect. Operation Crossbow was created as a coordinated effort to identify, bomb, and disrupt every aspect of the V-weapon system: research, production, transportation, and launch. It was placed under joint Allied control, combining British intelligence with American bombing capacity. The mandate was broad and urgent. Yet from the beginning, Crossbow faced serious obstacles. Targets were difficult to identify. German deception was effective. Some sites were decoys built specifically to draw bombs away from operational facilities. Others were hardened beyond what existing munitions could reliably destroy. Early raids often struck the wrong locations or produced ambiguous results. Complicating matters further, Crossbow competed for resources with the broader strategic bombing campaign. Aircraft diverted to attack suspected launch sites were not hitting factories or oil facilities. Every mission carried opportunity cost, and early results did little to silence critics. Despite this, the threat continued to grow. By early 1944, evidence suggested that the launch network was expanding rapidly. New sites appeared faster than they could be destroyed. The window for prevention was closing. If Crossbow failed, the consequences would be felt not on the battlefield, but in the streets of London, Antwerp, and beyond. The campaign was no longer theoretical. It was a race against deployment, fought with incomplete information and relentless urgency. conditions that would define the next phase of the operation. Operation Crossbow was defined by uncertainty. Unlike conventional bombing campaigns, success could not be measured by burning factories or shattered rail yards. The enemy's weapons were hidden, mobile, and deliberately disguised. Finding them was as critical as destroying them. The intelligence effort became the campaign's foundation. Aerial reconnaissance flew daily over occupied Europe, capturing thousands of photographs. Analysts examined every image for subtle irregularities, unnatural clearings in forests, newly poured concrete, rail lines that ended abruptly. Shadows were measured to estimate height. Soil disturbance was compared across weeks. What looked ordinary to the untrained eye often concealed a launch site. Human intelligence filled the gaps technology could not. Resistance networks reported unusual movements at night, convoys traveling without markings, and areas suddenly sealed off by German troops. These reports were fragmented and dangerous to obtain, but they provided context photographs alone could not. Cross-referencing both sources became essential. Technology added another layer of complexity. The V-1 and V-2 were fundamentally different weapons, demanding different responses. The V-1 relied on fixed launch ramps that could be attacked directly. The V-2, by contrast, was mobile and required only brief exposure before launch. Destroying rockets in flight was impossible. Interdiction had to occur earlier, at factories, depots, or rail junctions. For American bomber crews, crossbow missions were often frustrating. Targets were small and sometimes indistinct. Bomb damage assessment was inconclusive. A site might appear destroyed one day, only to resume activity days later. Crews flew without the feedback that usually followed city raids. They returned unsure whether anything had changed. German deception exploited this uncertainty. Dummy sites were constructed to resemble launch ramps, complete with false tracks and support buildings. Some were deliberately left vulnerable to draw Allied bombers away from operational locations. Bombs fell, photographs showed damage, and crossbow planners initially believed progress had been made. The reality was harsher. Leadership decisions reflected the pressure. Allied commanders had to balance skepticism with urgency. Doubt too much, and real threats would be missed. Believed too readily, and resources would be wasted. The campaign became a process of constant adjustment. Strike, observe, reassess, and strike again. On the German side, countermeasures evolved rapidly. Launch crews learned to operate under bombardment. Equipment was dispersed. Timetables were compressed. Mobility increased. The weapons themselves were becoming harder to pin down with each passing month. For civilians under threat, the results were invisible. Bombing raids against forests and rural areas offered little reassurance. The V-weapon attacks continued, and to many, it appeared that nothing was stopping them. Yet beneath the surface, pressure was building. Every delayed launch, every destroyed transport, every disrupted site added friction to a system that required precision and coordination to function. Crossbow's effect was not immediate but cumulative, a slow tightening that would only become visible as the campaign entered its most intense phase. For the people living under the shadow of the V-weapons, Operation Crossbow was defined less by what they could see than by what they could hear and what they could not stop. In London and later in Antwerp, the V-1's distinctive engine sound became a signal of dread. When the buzzing cut out, impact followed. The V-2 offered even less mercy. There was no warning at all. Civilians became unwilling participants in a technological experiment. Shelters offered limited protection. Interceptors could catch some V-1s, but not enough to prevent loss of life. Each successful launch amplified the sense that the enemy had found a way around conventional defense. This reality placed immense moral pressure on Allied planners. Crossbow targets were often located near towns and villages. Launch sites were camouflaged among farms, forests, and rail yards used by civilians. Bombing them risked collateral damage, yet leaving them untouched meant accepting civilian deaths elsewhere. The campaign forced a grim calculus: strike now and risk unintended harm, or wait and allow terror weapons to continue falling on cities. German leadership exploited this dilemma. Launch sites were deliberately placed where bombing would be politically and morally difficult. Mobility increased as fixed sites became vulnerable. V-2 units operated from wooded areas, launching rockets and moving within hours. The weapons themselves left no debris that could be traced back to a single point of origin. At the strategic level, the German goal was psychological as much as physical. V-weapons were never expected to defeat the Allies militarily. They were meant to erode morale, disrupt logistics, and force a diversion of resources. Every bomber sent hunting launch sites was one not attacking factories or oil refineries. Yet this strategy carried its own weakness. The V-weapon system was complex. It depended on uninterrupted production, specialized transport, trained crews, and precise timing. Any disruption along this chain reduced effectiveness dramatically. Crossbow exploited this vulnerability relentlessly, even when individual strikes appeared inconclusive. By early summer 1944, patterns began to emerge. Launch rates fluctuated. Some areas went quiet for days at a time. Intelligence assessments noted delays and irregularities. German radio traffic reflected urgency and frustration. The weapons were being used, but not with the reliability their designers intended. The Allied invasion of Normandy in June 1944 intensified this pressure. Launch areas in northern France were overrun or abandoned. Supply lines were severed. Mobile units were forced to relocate under fire. The geography that had once favored concealment now worked against rapid movement. For the first time, crossbow planners sensed a shift. The hunt was no longer reactive. It was beginning to dictate the enemy's behavior. Launches were fewer, more desperate, and increasingly constrained by events on the ground. The balance was changing, not suddenly, but decisively. What remained was the question of whether this pressure could be sustained long enough to neutralize the threat entirely, or whether Germany's most advanced weapons would still find a way to shape the war's final months. That answer would come as Operation Crossbow entered its turning point, where adaptation, timing, and sheer persistence would determine whether the hunt had been fast enough. The critical moment for Operation Crossbow arrived in the summer of 1944, when the volume of V-weapon attacks reached its peak and the limits of Germany's system were exposed. For weeks after the Normandy landings, V-1 flying bombs were launched toward England in large numbers, creating the impression that the campaign to stop them had failed. The numbers were alarming. Hundreds of V-1s crossed the Channel. Many were intercepted, but too many were not. Civilian casualties mounted. Entire neighborhoods were damaged or destroyed. Public confidence wavered as the weapons appeared to arrive faster than they could be stopped. Inside Allied headquarters, pressure intensified. Crossbow planners were forced to confront a painful reality. Direct attacks on fixed launch sites had not delivered decisive results. German forces adapted too quickly. Ramps were rebuilt or abandoned. Mobile launch methods reduced exposure time. The enemy was learning faster than anticipated. The response was a shift in strategy. Rather than focusing solely on launch sites, Crossbow expanded its scope. Attention turned to the broader system that sustained the weapons. Production plants, storage depots, fuel supplies, and transportation networks. Rail junctions became priority targets. Bridges were attacked. Rolling stock was destroyed. The aim was no longer to stop individual launches, but to disrupt the entire process that made launches possible. This shift coincided with changes on the ground. As Allied armies pushed inland from Normandy, German control over northern France began to collapse. Launch units were forced to withdraw eastward. Supply routes grew longer and more vulnerable. Sites that once lay safely behind the front were suddenly within artillery range or under constant air attack. The effect was cumulative. Launch rates began to decline. Missiles were delayed. Crews operated under increasing pressure, often forced to abandon equipment to avoid capture. Intelligence reports confirmed what photographs suggested. The system was fraying. Not broken, but strained beyond its intended limits. At the same time, attention turned to the V-2 rocket. Unlike the V-1, it could not be intercepted. Its launch required only minutes of exposure. Early crossbow efforts against V-2 facilities had achieved limited success, but the strategic environment was changing. Production sites faced bombing. Transport routes were disrupted. Assembly timelines slipped. The German High Command faced an uncomfortable truth. Their most advanced weapons demanded stability at a time when the battlefield offered none. Mobility, once an advantage, now meant vulnerability. By late summer 1944, the character of the campaign had shifted. The Allies were no longer reacting to each launch. They were shaping the conditions under which launches could occur at all. The turning point was not a single strike, but the realization that the V-weapon campaign could not be sustained indefinitely under this level of pressure, and the final phase of Operation Crossbow would determine how quickly that pressure translated into silence. As 1944 drew to a close, the V-weapon threat entered its final phase. What remained of Germany's launch capability was fragmented, mobile, and increasingly desperate. The systematic pressure applied by Operation Crossbow, combined with battlefield developments, had narrowed the space in which the weapons could operate. V-1 launches from northern France had largely ceased after Allied forces overran the launch zones. The focus shifted eastward, toward sites in the Low Countries, particularly those aimed at Antwerp. Here, the weapons continued to fall, but in reduced numbers and with declining effectiveness. Interceptors improved. Anti-aircraft defenses adapted. Each launch demanded greater effort for diminishing return. The V-2 rockets persisted longer, their impact sudden and terrifying, yet even they could not escape the consequences of disruption. Production at facilities such as Mittelwerk suffered repeated bombing. Transport of components was slowed by damaged rail lines and fuel shortages. Launch units were forced to relocate constantly, operating under threat of capture or air attack. Intelligence confirmed the trend. Intercepted communications revealed urgency and strain within German command. Timetables slipped, shortages mounted. The weapons still worked, but the system that sustained them was no longer coherent. Operation Crossbow had become less visible, but more effective. American and British bombers continued to strike transport nodes, storage depots, and suspected assembly areas. These missions lacked drama. Targets were often anonymous stretches of track or industrial buildings. Yet each successful strike removed another link in the chain. Another delay. Another missed launch window. By early 1945, the V-weapon campaign had lost its strategic relevance. Germany could no longer deploy the weapons in numbers sufficient to influence the war's outcome. Civilian casualties continued, but the terror no longer dictated Allied priorities or diverted resources at the scale originally feared. The race had been won not through a single decisive blow, but through attrition applied with precision. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the full scope of the V-weapon effort became clear. Vast resources had been poured into weapons that arrived too late and in too limited a form to alter the course of the war. The promise of technological salvation had collided with logistical reality. Operation Crossbow did not eliminate the V-weapons entirely. It did something more important. It prevented them from becoming decisive. The hunt had succeeded, not by stopping every launch, but by ensuring that Germany's most advanced weapons remained weapons of terror rather than weapons of victory. With the immediate threat neutralized, attention turned to the consequences of that effort and to what it revealed about a war increasingly shaped by technology rather than territory. When the V-weapon campaign finally ended, the human cost was already written across the cities it had targeted. In Britain alone, V-1 flying bombs and V-2 rockets killed thousands of civilians and injured many more. Entire neighborhoods were damaged or destroyed, not through sustained bombing, but through sudden, unpredictable strikes that offered no warning and no defense. Antwerp suffered similarly. As one of the Allies' most important ports after the Normandy landings, it became a primary target. Rockets fell without pattern, disrupting supply operations and keeping civilians in constant fear. Yet despite the destruction, the weapons never achieved their strategic aim. Shipping continued, armies advanced, the flow of men and material did not stop. Post-war analysis revealed why. Operation Crossbow had imposed limits the German program could not overcome. Bombing campaigns delayed production, forced dispersion, and strained transport networks already under pressure. Launch units were repeatedly displaced. Crews operated under conditions that reduced efficiency and increased failure rates. What might have been a sustained terror campaign became a series of diminishing returns. German resources tell the same story. Enormous effort had been invested in weapons that demanded precision, stability, and time. Conditions Germany no longer possessed by 1944. The V-weapons arrived too late and in numbers too small to alter the course of the war. They consumed resources that might otherwise have reinforced conventional forces or air defenses. For the Allies, Crossbow's success was measured not by total prevention, but by reduction. Every delayed launch meant lives spared. Every disrupted shipment shortened the window in which the weapons could operate. The campaign did not stop terror, but it contained it. In hindsight, Operation Crossbow stands as one of the earliest examples of a sustained counter-weapon campaign, one that combined intelligence, air power, and persistence to blunt a technological threat before it could reach its intended scale. As the war ended and the evidence was gathered, attention shifted from immediate relief to deeper questions about what this campaign had changed and how its lessons would carry forward into a new age of warfare. In the months after Germany's surrender, Allied investigators moved through abandoned facilities and captured documents, piecing together the full scale of the V-weapon effort and the campaign mounted to stop it. What emerged was a clearer picture of how close the threat had come and how fragile it truly was. Operation Crossbow was reassessed with a colder eye. Reports concluded that while bombing launch sites alone had produced mixed results, the broader strategy of disruption had been decisive. Intelligence-led targeting of production centers, transport routes, and support infrastructure had slowed the V-weapon program at every stage. Delays compounded. Output fell short of projections. Deployment never reached the level Germany's planners had envisioned. The findings carried weight beyond the war just ended. For the first time, a major military power had attempted to counter an enemy weapon system before it could mature, using air power not for immediate battlefield effect, but for denial. Crossbow demonstrated that weapons dependent on complex logistics could be weakened without being destroyed outright. Precision mattered less than persistence. The campaign also reshaped how intelligence was valued. Photo reconnaissance, resistance reports, and analytical interpretation proved as important as bombs themselves. Decisions were made on probability rather than certainty. Success came not from perfect knowledge, but from continuous pressure applied despite uncertainty. Public recognition remained limited. The end of the war was defined by images of liberation and surrender, not by the quiet prevention of what might have been worse. Crossbow's victories were invisible by nature. They were measured in launches that never happened and cities that were never struck. Yet within military circles, the lesson endured. Operation Crossbow marked a transition. Warfare was no longer confined to armies and front lines. It had expanded into a contest over systems, over technology, production, and time. The campaign showed that stopping a weapon could be as decisive as defeating an army. That realization would shape the conflicts to come, and it set the stage for a final reflection on what this hidden campaign revealed about the changing nature of war. Operation Crossbow occupies a quiet but pivotal place in the history of the Second World War. It was not a battle fought over territory, nor a campaign measured by lines on a map. It was a contest against time, secrecy, and fear, an effort to stop a weapon before it could redefine how wars were fought. For the first time, air power was used not primarily to destroy armies or cities, but to hunt an idea made real in steel and fuel. The V-weapons were not meant to win the war outright. They were designed to terrorize civilians, to sap morale, and to force political decisions through fear. Crossbow denied them that power by attacking the fragile systems that sustained them. The campaign revealed a fundamental truth about modern warfare. Advanced weapons do not exist in isolation. They depend on production lines, transport networks, trained crews, and time. When those elements are disrupted, even the most sophisticated technology becomes limited, delayed, and ultimately ineffective. Crossbow also marked a turning point in how intelligence was valued. Photographs, resistance reports, and analytical judgment became weapons in their own right. Bombs followed interpretation. Success depended not on certainty, but on persistence, the willingness to act repeatedly in the face of incomplete information. There is an uncomfortable moral dimension to this story. The campaign could not prevent every attack. Civilians still died. Entire cities lived under threat for months. Yet without Crossbow, the scale of destruction would almost certainly have been far greater. The operation reminds us that in total war, the measure of success is sometimes found in what never happens. In the years that followed, the world would enter an age defined by missiles, rockets, and weapons that traveled faster than sound. The challenges faced during Operation Crossbow, detection, disruption, and denial, would return in new forms, under new names. Operation Crossbow did not end the war, but it ensured that one of its most terrifying innovations never became decisive, and in doing so, It offered an early lesson for the modern age, that the most dangerous weapons can sometimes be defeated not by force alone, but by understanding the systems that make them possible.